All right, let's get as much stuff as we can.
You want to take the TV?
Yeah, sure, I'll get the mop. I can't, it's stuck.
Is it on?
It is. I guess we'll just have to do the show for today.
Welcome to Across the Hall, a podcast sharing ELA strategies from one door away with your hosts, Cade Summers and Michelle Shelton. This is episode 10, Creative Cruise.
Hi, I'm Grant.
And I'm Christina.
Today is Across the Hall Student Takeover.
Now, let's turn it over to Miss Shelton and Mr. Summers. They're interviewing John Spencer. John Spencer. They're interviewing John Spencer, who is a professor, author, and blogger. He teaches at George Fox University, a small Christian college in Oregon. He is an author of 3 books, Launch, Empower, and Making Learning Flow.
Welcome, John.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Whenever we were trying to decide exactly what we wanted to focus on, it was hard because you are just the master of all things, I think. But kind of the overarching theme that I see through everything that you do is empowering students. Just to get started with that, I'm going to go straight to whenever you are empowering students, teachers get scared. And
Yeah.
as I was reading, I saw where you also had your own fears about that. So before we even start, can we just get those out of the way?
Absolutely. So, I was afraid of a lot of different things. I remember being afraid of classroom management, what would happen if kids got, if it got too noisy or chaotic, if some kids wouldn't do the work that was required, then how do you track it? How do you assess it? How do you, what about the test? The whole fear of kids not doing well on a test. I remember being worried that if, the students are really owning the learning in the classroom, what would that mean when my administrator walked in, or the district office people, when like the whole crew of people come in with clipboards.
Yeah, right. So whenever I was reading about the fears that you had, I thought, oh my goodness, I have those exact same fears every time I ever try to do any kind of project of collaboration, or if I try to give the students any kind of choice or throw them off on their own at all. And some of those fears actually have come true here and there.
Yeah.
It is always worth it, right?
Yeah, we kind of put that in our book in Empower, but I say this when I work with pre-service teachers and when I do a keynote or when I do a workshop, but I mean it. Like, I had tons of things that failed. Like I had projects that I abandoned after a week because they weren't working. I had times where the classroom management did suffer, and then I had to learn how to manage differently in a way that respected student agency. There were so many different mistakes and iterations, and the other thing is, I had times where you run into your own humanity. Like I had times where, student-centered or not student-centered, that I shamed a student, or I yelled at a class, so I always want to be clear, like, some of those fears were based on the reality of, like, we're kind of broken people in a broken world. Like, things don't always go right. And they never will. There is no utopia. There's no, magic formula that solves every problem in a school or in a classroom. I was, even though we wrote Empower, and I'm all about this idea of empowering students. AJ and I were talking about this, that we always still had days where students would disengage, or we always had, even on our best days where the class seemed fully engaged and empowered and ready to learn, you'd still have 1 or 2 students who themselves were having an off day. So I hope I've made that piece kind of clear. Like teaching is a hard job.
It is definitely that. So you said you had to come up with a way to kind of handle the discipline, the classroom management. What are some strategies for doing that when you're having these kind of collaborative projects?
So, it's kind of interesting. Like, one of it comes down to one of the ideas is that the systems that you have to change a little bit. And so, rules about movement are different. And so for a lot of these activities, students are moving around a lot. And so I would just have to teach expectations about, free movement doesn't mean horseplay, which is an issue for 8th graders. Or, what do you do about storing materials in a makerspace? What do you do about expectations? And, some of it was that. Some of it was my own learning to trust that if you have a day when 30 different students are doing 30 different things, they could all be on task doing something differently at the same time. Training myself to get used to the fact that I might be doing a one-on-one conference with students and the rest of the class really knew how to manage themselves. I mean, and then I think, one of the things that I started doing pretty early on is on the management side was we created our procedure grid. And so it's just students would come up with questions of what they can and can't do. Can I sharpen my pencil? Can I throw something away? Just those types of questions. And then we had individual, partner, whole class, and direct instruction, teacher talking, whatever, And what happened? Oh, an individual, sorry. And then we would negotiate the procedures as a class. So they were agreed on democratically, and then also they were clarified, because I think a lot of misbehavior happens when students don't know what they're supposed to do. And so, it is different for a classroom where students are empowered, but it's also interesting how when they're empowered to own that particular piece, there's just a lot more buy-in. It's easy to go back and say, hey, these are the procedures we negotiated as a class. I mean, these are what we agreed upon.
So for our listeners who may not really have a grasp on it, what does it mean to empower students?
I think the goal is to get them to own as much of the process as possible. So like the driving question I would ask is, what am I doing for students that they could be doing for themselves? And it's the classic thing of how many times do we leave school exhausted and students aren't? It's that whole idea, right? They should be doing so much more of the learning, from the assessment to asking questions to designing things on their own, the creative process and everything.
Yeah, I was just, one of the things you mentioned just recently in one of your podcasts was about, well, no, it wasn't that at all. It was, I think you had tweeted it. I read this yesterday or the day before. You had retweeted something of George Kuros's that made me think of some of the misnomers about empowerment. I think things about the idea that it's getting away from the standards or that it's a free-for-all, I think, is something else that he had said. But anyway, some of what you're saying here kind of resonates with that there's some misnomers. One question I guess I would have is pertaining to like some of your natural leaders in the classroom are going to be natural leaders, but how do you get the feeling of empowerment from some of those that I know you have described a lot in the past? Some of those students like in group work. I think you've had a podcast recently on that, where those quiet kids that never really do participate in the group, they're the tag-alongs. How do you accomplish them, first of all, and I guess not just doing the work, but feeling empowered?
Yeah, I love that question. So, one of the things that I always try to figure out is, as you craft projects, to find ways that every student has a voice within a group, and so like I'll use design thinking as an example, but I think it's found all over the place. In design thinking, if there's a design thinking project early on in the inquiry stage, when they're asking questions, you have the students generate a list of questions on their own first. the idea that when they engage in research, they can pull away from the group and do individual research and then take that back to the group. I have a short video kind of showing the brainstorming process I use, but it's really focused on this idea of making sure every single student has a voice in the process, breaking up the group roles so that you might have a group leader, but then your group leader is not the person who is deciding or not the person who is keeping people on task. The person who is making sure everyone is on task is the project manager. So, you have a separate leader who is a thought leader whose job it is to constantly ask if there are new ideas, better ideas, whatever. And then in the process, even though you have an official group leader, every student has shared leadership within it. And so I think there's things like that can make a difference. It also really depends on the age group. I think maybe younger students have to, in like a kindergarten or first grade class, are probably going to have to see some of that modeled and experience some of it themselves. And I think maybe there's more of a challenge. But then I think maybe high school teachers struggle with the fact that some of the students who are going to check out a little bit or who aren't going to step up and lead or whatever, some of those students have years, a full decade as a pattern of doing that. And so I think the idea is to hopefully, provide those structures that allow for every student to have a voice.
I read something that you wrote about introverts and making sure to consider them.
Yeah.
I myself I took a test, 99% introverted.
Yeah.
I understand the struggle, and I really do try to consider them whenever I do these group projects and try to find roles that'll make them comfortable. But also try to get them to understand that they have their own strengths that maybe the extroverts don't have. So, So what are some ways to get introverts involved in that?
Well, I think it's a lot of kind of what I had mentioned about, giving within a collaborative project, giving every student a chance to work individually, making sure that's a piece of it. I also think that there's, so there's the collaborative project piece. There's also kind of the balance of how much of your class is individual work versus group work. And I always, in general, had kind of a 50-50 split. So even though, I wrote a series on collaborative projects and I included that idea of introverts, I think introverts also outside of that need that opportunity to work individually. So silent reading, blogging, those types of things are perfect for introverts to have kind of a voice. And then the other piece is just like giving them processing time and giving them a heads up. So if we had a class discussion or a Socratic seminar or something like that, I would try to warn them ahead of time and say, this is the topic. These are some general questions. Think about it ahead of time. When you feel comfortable, speak up. And I think those were all, a piece of it. I never had that 100% right. I like I said, it was sometimes rocky, and there were some students who were not just introverted; they were really shy, and growth. It was incremental, and I had to be okay with that.
That has been one of the even for me is in faculty meetings or whenever we're doing PD collaboratively, I have a really difficult time coming up with an answer just right in that instant. I need a second to think, to write it out. So I can definitely relate to those students. It's hard sometimes to figure out how to make that work and give them that chance to think.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things that our school is recently involved in is in this coming January, we're really trying to push a lot more design thinking in our system. But one of the things we're involved in is called Classroom CEO. And basically what it is it's a partnership with local business leaders. Certain teachers throughout the school are teamed up with a business leader who comes in. And this year, rather than it typically like the first year, the pilot was just, it was about soft skills. This year, it's about getting them in the community and doing some real project that starts with the design thinking process. And so we partnered with a museum, and I just wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit. I'm teamed up with the local museum. It's called the Anniston Museum of Natural History.
Okay.
And they're allowing my class to kind of take a children's discovery zone and just completely make it a blank slate. So it's supposed to be designed for like kindergartners to, like, I guess, toddlers to kindergarten, that age.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest in terms of a good place for my students to get started in something like that, with a museum and that particular age group and a room like that?
That is awesome. I love the opportunity. I really do. I want to hear how it goes through your journey. Like make sure you email me and tell me on Twitter. And like, I really want to, like, that sounds like an awesome project. I think, like, to me, kind of the first starting place would be, I'll use the launch cycle as kind of an example. I know there's other design thinking frameworks, but like in that initial place of look, listen, and learn, I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of give them the scenario that this is who you're making it for, and this is what you're going to be making, and then really allow a good amount of not it doesn't necessarily have to be a long amount of time, come to think of it. Just make sure there's a solid period of inquiry where they can ask questions. Like they might ask, what are kids into? What do they like? What's developmentally appropriate and stuff. And then I think the cool thing there is getting them involved in every type of research. So can they do research on child development? Can they do research on toys that have been popular, games that have been popular? Is there some mechanism available? And maybe there's not, but is there some mechanism where they can watch kids of that age group play, right? Because if they can observe kids at play and take notes, even if it's just younger brothers or sisters or nephews or cousins or whatever, like maybe that's some kind of chance to better formulate what their concept's going to be. So as you think about the starting places, I kind of think like that inquiry, and then, where can they engage in research? Yeah.
It's really something new that for the museum as well as for me and our school. So we're really excited, but I like the ideas there. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Sounds like a cool opportunity. I mean, I'm really like, I'm kind of jealous because I feel like I never got to do that with my students. Like,
we both just listened to your recent podcast on inquiry and having students question the answers rather than answering the questions. And that really spoke to me because I've had a really hard time getting my students to believe that they're creative, to ask those questions and to get outside that comfort zone and to get outside of the box of what they normally think of. We both teach English. So what they normally think of, this is what an English class is supposed to be. And I'm trying to push them through with design thinking. And we're also, it's really hard to get them there to that place of inquiry. You have any advice on that?
And just getting them to get over the fears that they experience. In some cases, you almost have to allow the inquiry to be anonymous at first, So for example, if I had a class that was really risk averse in asking questions, I would provide sentence frames for them, kind of question frames. But a lot of my students were also ELL, so that there was that component. And then if they were afraid and they knew that I wasn't going to judge, then I realized that what they were really afraid of was their peers, which is a big deal in 8th grade and probably more so in high school. And so, I would have them submit their initial questions on a Google form. And then we would just have access to the whole spreadsheet as a class. And I would say, this is an amazing question. Hey, check out this question. I don't know who did this, but it was awesome. And inevitably, they would see one of their questions being affirmed. And then we would slowly move into that as well. And so that was kind of another piece. If it's the fear aspect,
I think that would be really good for one of the things we try to push with questioning is deeper level questioning when it relates to a text. So you got the superficial, what does the text say? And then secondly is generally like an inferential question. And then the third is the highest level is making application to the world around you. And those are always the hardest. Kids have an easy time, with the explicit text reference. But I like the idea of bragging on the ones that you see, that are done really well. And then they start catching on, how to please and how to really ignite more interest and excitement about those higher level questions.
And I definitely think, like part of what you experience too is like you mentioned a PAP group. One of the things I'm sure you experience is that you're going to have students who are really good at playing the game of school, and the game of school has worked for them. And the game of school rewards answering questions more than asking questions. It rewards getting to the answer quickly, and so they've been playing this game for so long that they're really good at, and being good at that's not necessarily bad, but then you're asking them to design something and to be inquisitive and to be creative, and suddenly it does have that potential to bring up weaknesses. And like you said, Michelle, that they might be convinced in some cases that they're not creative, but that they are, because everyone is, right? So you have this other self-perception battle going on, and so it really is a challenge.
Speaking of creative, you are creative. I came across your series where you talked about the Hogwarts professors. And I was so excited. I was walking around making all the teachers around me watch the video. How Harry is the best. And anyway, that was just really inspiring to me because I'm a huge Harry Potter fan.
Oh, we're big Harry Potter fans at our house too, like all of us.
And it made perfect sense. Harry was the best. I mean, he's the best, right?
I think so.
Alert, I guess, but.
I love that. I mean, that whole Room of Requirement and the Dumbledore's Army, and I remember when I was reading that part in the books, because I think I read that book before the movie had come out, and I just remember thinking like, man, this is what I want for my students.
Is that something? Yesterday we got to present. It's the first time we've ever presented anything about our podcast. We got to present at the Learning Forward conference in Birmingham, and I connected some things from Stranger Things, episode 5 of like season 2, to education. But I don't always do that. Is that something that you do on a regular basis? Is like taking culture? It makes fun connections.
It does.
I don't know. I guess I probably am. Like because I do think about learning a lot, and so that's probably happening all the time. I'm trying to think that I don't think I did that at all with Stranger Things, though. I haven't seen the second season, but I did see the first one, and now I'm rewatching the second one with my oldest two. They're 12 and 10. It's a little bit scary.
It is,
but they're handling it fine. So I'm trying to pay close attention. But I don't think I ever like made a learning connection. So now I'm dying to watch season 2.
It's episode 5 of season 2.
Episode 5, season 2. Okay.
And it's Bob discovering the map. So I just think of students.
Oh, cool.
I don't have to say anything else, but I just thought of students as Bob, and it just made so many different connections to what we do in our system, but also just in education. It was pretty neat.
Yeah.
So
Cade had a request of you when it comes to our podcast.
So
okay.
Michelle is she is always on it. You can get that impression from her anytime you talk to her. So one of the things that she's been on me about is, we need some way to end our show. And of course, we've listened to different podcasts trying to compare and see what we could grab and do better and all of that. And of course, it always gravitates to, and I told her, like, you seem to be, I've never met you, but you and everything you write and every time I've heard your voice, every video I've seen, you seem to be not only like professional in all ways and share this expertise, but you seem to be like the nicest guy on the planet. So it is so fitting that you end your show with this message of go out and make something awesome. Which just yesterday, I'm riding home from the conference, actually riding to a basketball game from the conference, and it clicked. I was listening to you, and it clicked. I was like, hey, I want to ask him. It would be like our John Spencer thing. You shared this logo on Twitter recently, and you said, hey, everybody, vote for the logo that you like best. And I voted logo B.
I voted.
I think. So
okay.
Some logo that you had sent out. And yeah. And so anyway, we are inviting you to help us to come up with some way to end our show.
Oh, man.
So he's saying we helped you. You need to help us.
Yeah. I'm not really sure how we helped you. To what degree voting was for that. But
no, that was helpful.
Right now, we just kind of drop it, and the show ends. But it would be so neat to have one way to end it with a John Spencer spin. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
We can edit out the think time. It's okay.
Think time.
So
Like you just put in music during the think time, like elevator music. So an ending thing that you're like a catchphrase, is that it? Like a
catchphrase to our audience that we would keep forever.
What I see from you guys and what I hear from your podcast is just like passion and energy and a willingness to kind of like take creative risks. This is a fun challenge.
You work your design thinking on that.
I think I would say this, like, this is probably a bad one. I think I would say like, I'd probably say no matter how long you've been teaching or where you're at, be sure to experiment and keep I just keep going on this experiment thing. You strike me as people who are always experimenting. So like,
for sure.
So I would say almost that, like, no matter what you teach or how long you've been teaching, always remember to experiment.
We will utilize that. That'll be it's our John Spencer thing. Look, when we said at the conference that we were interviewing you the next day, as all of a sudden it gets everybody's attention. It was fantastic. And we just live and thrive off of other people, whether it's our students or you guys. It's so much fun.
I have one other thing, and then we'll let you go get back to your life. I asked some of my students who've been doing design thinking in my room and with their graphic arts teacher if they had any questions. And I had one kid who replied, and he said he doesn't, and I don't know what he's talking about exactly, but he said that how can you get the teacher, because he's a ninth grader and he's very honest, how can you get the teacher to not spend so much time on one step of design thinking until you're tired of it? This is what he said. So I guess turning that question into something a little more answerable, I guess, how much time should it take to teach the process in the beginning?
I think it does take a while in the beginning. So one of the things I've been, thinking about is this idea of in the future, as I do design thinking with students, I want to, and I did this a little bit when I taught 8th grade, but I want to start with doing like a rapid prototyping thing first. So giving them no time to work on it, like taking 1 or 2 class periods, like really fast, and say, you're going to make a blank, and it's not going to be good, right? But just do that. And then that sort of allows them to get that like initial creativity out of their system. And then they can take the time on the design thinking piece because they've already made one. So they know this is like version 2 and it's going to be better. Like I would almost compare it to, in tennis, your first serve is really, really fast, and it's often a fault. It's not very good, but it's just, you're just not even thinking about it. You're just throwing out that first serve as hard as you can. And you may create a gem. It may be awesome, but there's a good chance it won't be. And then you focus, you slow down, you think about the mechanics, the process, and in your second serve is more calculated. And so I think the same thing is true of a lot of design thinking stuff. Like I'll give an example. We use the design thinking process to do like a eco-friendly kitchen project. So they had to design like a kitchen that would be as close to 0 carbon footprint as possible. Well, that required a lot of research, a lot of questions. They wanted to jump straight into making. So what I did instead was I said, like, we're going to take 45 minutes and you're going to design a solar oven. We're going to start with that. And it's not going to be very good. And they didn't work properly. They weren't great. They weren't whatever. And then I said, all right, you're going to incorporate the solar oven into this new challenge of a totally eco-friendly kitchen. But this time, if you want to look at examples of other solar ovens and then like iterate and improve and change, then you have the time to do that. And suddenly it was almost like research became almost like a cheat code in a video game or something. Like it became a positive thing. And so sometimes just doing a little bit of quick, like rapid prototyping before design thinking can sometimes help students who are impatient.
Because that'll probably satisfy Josh. That was the student who asked the question.
I love how practical these questions are. I love it, and I seriously, I love what you guys are doing. It's really cool.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow, it was such a thrill to have John Spencer talk to us today.
That was John Spencer. That was amazing. John Spencer.
John Spencer.
All right. Well, just another tally in all of the tally marks that we're starting to accrue here of all the many different educators and voices in education that are willing to come speak to us, little old us, on
Crazy.
Across the Hall.
Right. As Cade and I were bouncing around ideas of how we could add something of worth to John's interview, it occurred to me that maybe the best thing that we could do was to step aside and actually practice what we're preaching by empowering some of our students to decide what to do for the second segment. So that's what we did.
So I chose 2 of my students, and Michelle chose a couple of hers, and we handed over the reins to them. That's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
So to be completely honest, the kids attempted to hand us back the reins a few times, and we didn't let them. They found it a bit overwhelming, as you might expect, because we've been overwhelmed trying to do what we put them into, that position. But in the end, I think they did a pretty good job. Those 2 voices you heard at the beginning of this episode were my sophomore students, Grant Reeder and Christina Dita.
And my freshman students, Josh Whaley and Nathan Robbins, will take over the rest of the show. Nathan also created the cover art for the episode and decided to name it The Creative Cruise. After hearing the interview with John Spencer, they came to me and asked if they could please interview their graphic arts teacher, Theresa Shadrix, because Ms. Shadrix has been teaching them design thinking all throughout this year in graphic arts. And so I told them that it was their call. The rest of the show belongs to them. So that's what they did.
All right, so we could have probably broken this up into a couple episodes, but we made it one good-sized episode because they did such a good job, and it incorporates some really great elements. So here are Josh Whaley and Nathan Robbins. Make us proud, guys.
Now we have Oxford High School's very own Miss Shadrix. She is our own graphic arts teacher, and she also is in partnership with IDEO, the founders of Design Thinking. So it's a pretty exciting day here. We've got Miss Shadrix in the recording studio with us.
Hey, Miss Shadrix, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine, guys. How are y'all?
Doing pretty good. You know, it's just another school day, so we were kind of forced to come here. But
I think you need to edit that out. I take offense to that.
Well,
we're here to talk about design thinking.
we are.
I'm trying desperately to be very empathetic with you right now.
In case you didn't know, Ms. Shadrix has some information on design thinking that she's acquired through this partnership with this program that's out of California.
Yeah, so the program in California is called the Teachers Guild, and I am a Teachers Guild Fellow for this school year, for the 2017 to 2018. I'm one of 10 fellows in the nation, and so it was an application process, very... I don't know the right word for it. It was kind of one of those things I thought there's no way that I will be selected. I would say that my creative confidence was rather low in the process. And then, of course, meeting the other fellows that live, in other school districts across the nation, it's pretty overwhelming that I was one of the 10 that was selected, in the nation. It's a lot of pressure in some ways, but it's exciting.
Before you began your partnership with Teachers Guild, have you ever heard of design thinking or IDEO or the founders or anything?
Yeah, so the whole journey to kind of getting to where I am today is one of those things that I try to teach you guys, is take advantage of learning opportunities and take responsibility. And so a couple of years ago, I joined an organization called ASCD, and it's kind of probably boring to you guys, but it's like curriculum development for teachers, and it's really exciting. And I learned about that because I went to Teach to Lead, which is an initiative that Arnie Duncan, who used to be our Secretary of Education, started with the Department of Education. And so I went to the Baltimore Summit in 2016 with a program called Classroom CEO, which you guys know a little bit about, that we're doing at Oxford High School. We're in our second year, and we partner teachers and students with a business, CEO or business leader, and you work on, initiatives like in the classroom or in the community. Last year we piloted the program. We had 5 teachers, and this year we have 10 teachers that we're working on. So in this whole process of kind of learning and growing, kind of learning how to be a teacher is really what I did, because this is a second career for me. I was a journalist before I became a teacher. I started reading more and more about design thinking. It just kept coming up in a lot of the readings that I was doing on my own. So in reading about design thinking, I really wanted to find other people, those like-minded people. We call it, a tribe or your posse, your crew. I don't know what you guys call it today. I don't know what the cool word for that
Squad.
is. Okay, your squad. So, I had to find, my squad. And so in doing that, then, you grow your network. So in teaching, we call that our, personal learning network or our professional learning network. Around the same time, Mr. Harmon, who is our principal here, started this whole, trying to teach students about growth mindset, which is, one of the foundational cores to design thinking is just having a mindset, that you're not stuck in a fixed setting that you're never going to learn and grow. And he was doing the same thing that I was doing, just constantly learning, seeking out opportunities to grow as an educator. We didn't really, I'd known Mr. Harmon for many years, and but I had no idea I was reading a lot of the same books that I was reading. Some of the teachers here at Oxford High School that were involved in Classroom CEO, we were all kind of searching for these opportunities to grow ourselves as educators, but we didn't know that we were all doing it at the same time. And so when we kind of were intentional of coming together as that learning community, we found out, wow, we all have this interest in learning more about design thinking. Around the same time, we went back to Teach to Lead for another summit, and Mr. Harmon, Mrs. Harmon, Mr. Summers, who's they're two of our English teachers, and then Miss Goodwin from our board office. We went to the Columbus, Ohio summit last year and worked on it was called Follow My Lead. And so we were very intentional about student leadership, and that was a passion that I had. From that, Emily Davis from ASCD nominated me for the Teachers Guild Fellow. And so when I say that's a journey, it's like you never know when you do one thing how it's going to affect another. And so it's been a process for me. But it's also been people have believed in me, and that is so important. And I know you guys feel that as students, but, as an educator, I'm the same way because I'm human. And so for me, when she nominated me, which, shout out to Emily for doing that, I kind of started this process of applying for this fellowship, and I really thought it was spam mail at first when I got the email that I had been nominated. And so I kind of ignored it at first, and then I emailed back kind of thinking it was going to be, we sent this by mistake. We didn't mean to send this to Miss Shadrix. Found out, no, this is real, and that it was the Teachers Guild that I had joined and I'd been reading about, that was created by IDEO to help teachers learn design thinking and create this, true innovative culture in school systems. So there's no one moment where I can tell you this is where things changed for me, because a lot of it has been, it's not me alone, it's been our school system. And it also has been other people in other school systems that have helped me kind of get to where, I am. So that way I can hopefully give this information and help students.
So you kind of said that it's a process to where you came from to understand design thinking and get into it. So can you kind of tell us about what happened in the beginning or when you first started and to where you are now? What that process has been like, and you just kind of talked about that, but what was different when you first began to where you are right now?
Well, design thinking, the framework, of course, of design thinking, which, I'm going to ask you guys, what are the initial 5 steps? What are they?
Empathy.
Empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test.
Yes, so that's the framework that David Kelly, when IDEO basically was first started, when he really started working more with businesses. And, we've talked a lot about some of the different products that were made because IDEO, created them. And it was the same for me. I had to change my perceptions of how I looked at education and how I taught. And the first thing for me is, in all things, is that empathy. And really, like, getting out of, like, my comfort zone as an educator and thinking, like, what do I like and how do I learn best when I'm a student? And trying to be like a student today. Education is very different from when I was in high school. You guys have a lot more flexibility with creativity. Ours was basically lecture-based. All of our classes were like that, except for our elective classes. And it's still kind of like that in some ways today. But in all of your classes, you do have a lot more creativity, I think, than back in the Stone Age when I was in school. And I did graduate from Oxford High School, so I graduated from the same school that you guys are attending. And when I graduated, I said, I'll never be back at this school. I'm leaving. I'm going out, and I wanted to go to New York and become a journalist. And look at me, I'm right back. So be careful what you say when you graduate high school. So learning design thinking for me has really revolutionized the way that I have looked at just teaching. Because the first thing for me is empathy. It really is looking at, what is best for the student. And am I really teaching? I teach graphic arts and advertising and design and, yearbook. Our class is very busy. It's a difficult class, because we use Adobe software. You guys know it's a lot going on. But I wanted it to be fun and creative also, and to really challenge students to take the next level. Don't just do things because I'm telling you, to do this. To expand your skills, and that way you'll be able to use them in your other classes, and also, take it out there into the world and become, global agents of change. That's what, the initial thing. You are prime examples that it's working, because what you did is you took a lot from what you were learning in my class with design thinking. Miss Shelton in her English class was also teaching design thinking, and so you were able to take that into another, class. And the fact that we're sitting here talking about design thinking is, one of those things that it helps me to see that, what we're doing in creating this new culture in our school system is working.
So you've kind of made the point that. So would you say that everyone can use design thinking, regardless? Because you kind of you graduated from Oxford, and then you went to journalism, but then you came back and you became a graphic arts teacher, and me and Nathan, freshmen in high school, and then countless others, and those other 9 people that you talked about that are across the nation. What do you think about that? What do you think about other, just random everyday people using design thinking?
Yes, design thinking is really anyone can use it. It's not like a magic pill, as I believe David Kelly says. It's a process. It's a process to solving problems. It's not rocket science, but scientists definitely probably have used design thinking to create rockets. And so some of the people who use design thinking in the business world, IBM has an entire department dedicated to design thinking. And so if businesses look at it and, say, hey, this is something that works for us in creating products or services, then as educators and as students, then we know anyone really can use this process. In our school system at Oxford, it's not just Oxford High School, but Oxford City Schools. We're implementing design thinking in all of our schools. And so there's different parts of it that from, elementary all the way to high school that we are teaching students. And it's just really approaching things from a completely different, fresh perspective. If we're going to tell students, hey, we want you to be leaders of your own learning, as Ron Berger states in his book, which is something that we as a faculty have studied, if we're going to tell you guys, we want you to be leaders, because if you learn how to lead when you're in high school, then hopefully when you go out into the world, you're going to do the same thing. We have to give you the tools to do that. And so design thinking is one tool that can help you and equip you into solving problems.
And going on that, how has it helped you?
Well, again, I think empathy was huge for me. understanding. I mean, I'm a creative person anyway, but I've had to let go a little bit. In the past, I think I've probably micromanaged. I tell students, I think it was Nathan, I think it was your class, don't mess with my hall cred, because I want students to think that I am tough. I have very high expectations in the classroom. You guys, I don't know if you feel that or not, but I do. I don't want to lower my expectations, but I want my students to be creative. And I don't mean you have to draw. A lot of people confuse creativity with, I can't draw, or I can't, I'm not artistic. I teach a creative class that, we do things every day that necessarily, might not be, quote, artistic. And David Kelly speaks about, and David Kelly's one of the founders of IDEO, who, design thinking is something that's not new. It's been used for years. But what David Kelly and IDEO did is they took this process and they basically helped give it a focus so that way it could be duplicated. They gave it a method, basically, that other people could take. And you can, go to their website and they have tons of resources to help. And so for me as a teacher, I think the initial thing for me and the most effective is really equipping students, with that voice that, I do have a say in how I learn. And sometimes maybe, pushing you a little bit and seeing things that maybe you can't see. You guys, you're the ones who know, you're the students. How has it affected you?
You want to take this one, Nathan?
Yeah, sure. Well, like she said, empathy has definitely affected me because, I think everybody needs to learn empathy, whether, no matter the circumstance or job or whatever. If students need it for their teachers, it takes teachers a while to get stuff graded sometimes, and you need to empathize and put yourself in their place and realize that they have a life also, and it can take them a while to get it done. And you can also use it for other classmates. And so that's one big thing I've learned.
Something I've kind of learned from design thinking is just really how to use it in other classes. Kind of just because I know there are certain students in other classes that don't necessarily aren't on the same level as other students. And just that may slow down, the process of how the classroom functions and all. But I think that we need to utilize empathy a little bit more there and get a little less frustrated when we're not getting, our learning, but we're kind of sitting there and not really caring about their learning and how they're processing the information.
So on empathy, because I think it's not just I feel for you, I can walk in your shoes. Do y'all remember when we did the Unmask It in class, where you wrote on one piece of paper, everyone drew a mask, and then you wrote 3 things to describe what others might see about you. And then you turn it around, and then you wrote 3 things that basically people don't know or you hide kind of from people. We put it in a ball, and then I think we had a snowball fight. Didn't we have a? We did. Yeah. So we had a little snowball fight with the paper, and that was just to kind of take the ease off a little bit. And when we kind of got in our circle, I can tell you this was a changing point in our classroom environment when we did this, from my observation, because when you picked up a piece of paper and everyone, talked about the 3 things that were on the top, and we kind of went around, it was on the front of the paper, everyone was kind of being silly. And when we flipped it over, and this was something that we actually did at Teachers Guild, when the fellows went, and it got very intense. We weren't even really expecting how intense it was going to get for us as adults. And so doing that with students over and over and over, when we flipped over the paper and then everyone shared what was on, the back, the things that we hide from people, over and over in the classrooms, it was the same kinds of things. if someone had confident on the front, of their mask, then so many times it was like insecure on the back. And it really built an environment of empathy and understanding in our classroom, because you're looking around the room in this diverse room of, young people. Of course, I did it as well, so I'm like the old person in the room. But when we did that, it was something that it was kind of like everybody was on the same ground. Everyone struggles with insecurities. High school sometimes is like the hardest chapter, in your life, because you're trying to learn, you're trying to grow. There's so many demands on you, and we have to understand that as educators. And I feel like I do. I try so hard, even if sometimes I'm human. I might say, well, hey, I need you to do your work. But the empathy part to me was really, impactful.
What are some situations or projects that you've used design thinking in the classroom or with your fellow Teachers Guild teachers?
Great question, Nathan. For the Teachers Guild fellow, we each fellow has a passion project. And so my passion project is student voice. And so my How Might We is related to that. It's how might we develop a student leadership network to intentionally build capacity in order for students to become local and global agents of positive change. It's rather long. That was the initial one, but it was all about basically equipping students to be leaders. And we also have to have followers. So that was where the whole notion of calling it Follow My Lead came from, because everyone can't be a leader. And you might lead on one project, but on the other, you're not the lead. And we have to learn that. And so for me, just teaching design thinking was part of that. And I had to get a little bit away from some of the curriculum of the class in order to teach some innovation. And a lot of people, may say, teaching design thinking to a bunch of freshmen and, sophomores is not going to work. But you guys really embraced it. And so I was able to take this passion project of helping students find your voice. And you guys were able to take that, and you've been working on, projects in the classes that are learning design thinking. So for me, it's energetic to see what you have done. We have one class that is starting a recycling program, because we don't have one here. We did in the past, and I don't really know what happened. And and it's important for students to have sustainable energy. And so they look at, hey, how are we using products and what are we doing with them when we throw them away? We have another class, and their passion project is related to, well, it started off as hallway engagement, but it ended up being about basically taking these bland hallways and making them into a museum-like exhibit about our school, because we do have a very diverse, community in Oxford, and so we have a lot of people who didn't grow up here. They've moved in. They don't really know a lot about, like, our high school. And so the students, that was the idea that they came up with using design thinking, was let's take these hallways and let's instill that community pride, working with alumni. And so that's the idea that they came up with. What was the ideas that your groups came up with?
Oh, we had the recycling project.
Y'all are in recycling, yeah. So
ours was to make divided hallways to kind of narrow down the congestion of the hallways during class transitions.
So yours was the navigation. Yeah, and so was your group the one that basically wanted to make hallways look like roads, like a road map?
We were the ones that wanted to make the ones look like roads.
Yeah, so again, another same idea. Hallway navigation and then hallway engagement were two very popular things with students. These came out of surveying other students that you guys did and gals. And so it was a very popular thing. We have another one that we're working on. It actually is a Classroom CEO project. And we're working with Lisa Morales from East Alabama Works and creating a design thinking studio for our community. And so this is not something that we know like it's going to finish, in when this school year ends. We know this is a process that we have to look at. How is this going to be effective in our community, and how can we take design thinking so that students, educators, parents, the community, that we can work together. And we have to do that, of course. It comes from you guys, from students, and just learning the design thinking process. So my students are doing a lot of different projects, and to me, that's where like I get a lot of the energy, and just it makes me very happy to see that you're doing something with it.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned, the classroom CEO and building a design studio in Oxford, because we're also in the classroom CEO with Miss Shelton, and we've been to a few meetings with actually some city council members, and also some of the Oxford's more elderly population.
Such as we partnered with the police chief, the fire chief, the mayor came in one day, the Parks and Recreation director, and we asked them, we're trying to make Oxford a better place for the future, for that people would want to come back to, for the younger people and for the elders too. So we took them in the class one day and we interviewed them and asked them about Oxford. Like Ms. Shadrix said a while ago, how Oxford, there's not a lot of people who know our history and stuff that lives here now. One of the elders said that in 1980 the population was like 4,000, and now it's like 22,000 or something like that. So you can see how much we've grown over the years. But we're just trying to make Oxford a better place.
And something that's kind of came from that is also those who don't know kind of Oxford's like general situation. We have a closed down Sears building in our mall, and they're also trying to figure out what store we could kind of bring into that spot. And so we've kind of, from what we've kind of talked to them and all, we've gotten very different answers from different age groups, and so what we're trying to do is just figure out a way to bring all those together, and it's really made us use empathy to try to determine, what we want, but also look at their needs and what they actually need and what they would want, and just trying to come to a common standpoint on it.
Yeah, because part of Classroom CEO, what we did this year, talking about that whole, process and the journey, is we added design thinking as the problem-solving process to help all of these schools. And although it's something that, I kind of helped ignite that. I don't micromanage all the teachers. Like, everyone is doing their own thing and their own project. Because if we help students to become leaders, we're also helping teachers to become leaders. And so that's the core of Classroom CEO as well. What you guys are talking about is this. It's a multi-generational project of trying to figure out how does a city meet the needs of, younger residents, but also older. And Mayor Kraft is the CEO, basically, that was actually partnered with two of our English teachers, is Miss Harmon and Miss Shelton. The city of Oxford is their CEO, and it shows how forward-thinking that our city government is in looking at, our high school students are doing something that's worthy to partner with them and listen and kind of hear what they have to say, but also using this whole design thinking process where how can we make effective change in our city. And it's exciting for me to hear from you guys how you're being utilized and how you are being involved. So Tim Brown, something that he blogged about that I really like is he said the myth of leadership is that it has to be top down, meaning it's like the boss tells you to do it and then so you just do it. What design thinking has done in our school system, but also now, as you guys have said, even with our city, is that it's not top down. It's very fluid. It's everybody basically talking to each other and helping to learn, how can we have a productive community, not just a productive school. And that, to me, is the beauty of what design thinking has done to help change our culture because it's changing our school and it's changing our community. And then some of the things that we are all doing, we want it to expand even from there. So hats off to you guys for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, and thank you for kind of leading us into design thinking. We'd like to thank Miss Shelton, Mr. Summers, and Miss Shadrix for joining us on this week's Across the Hall podcast. And also, John Spencer. John Spencer. John Spencer. John Spencer.
Thank you for listening to Across the Hall podcast. Be sure to tune in next time to Mr. Summers and Miss Shelton. For now, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Josh.
Thanks so much for listening to episode 10. Don't forget to stop by acrossthehallpodcast.com for the show notes and join the Across the Hall conversation at #XTheHall. We'd love to hear about how you are empowering students in your classroom or school. We hope you'll join us next time when we talk to Rich Chiz, author of 4 O'Clock Faculty. See you next time.
Yabba dabba doo. My mom burps.